The rules for dealing with negative comments online have changed.
Because sure, critical comments on social media aren't a new phenomenon, but they are getting nastier.
And churches? Well, let's just say few things get people as angry as religion does.
So how do you deal with it? Are you just gonna delete everything you want? Are you gonna try to engage with it?
We're here to set you straight on the exact best practices to follow.
Let's dive in.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him Pastor Passport, aka the Minister of Minneapolis. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
And today we're tackling social media hate and how your church should respond. I'll start off by saying that the rules of engagement here have changed on this a bunch. Because in the previous era of social, I would have suggested that churches very rarely, if ever, delete social media comments. Today, that is no longer the advice that I have for you. There are very important reasons why for this, so let's explore them. First, let's talk about the previous era of social where every comment that came into your church would have almost certainly been a person that was connected to your church in some way. And this is why I wouldn't have recommended in 2018 and earlier for your church to quickly jump to deleting comments, because probably that person was like 1 degree separated from a person connected to your church. And we were not introducing our church to new people on social very often because in the social graph era, which is 28 and earlier, the content that we saw on our feed was from our friend and family connections, your social graph. And so if you were deleting a comment, it meant that you were removing a comment from a person that was connected to your church already directly, or a person that saw it because your friend shared it. So it was like 1 degree separated. And so the better approach in that era was to maybe remove the comment, but then like privately DM them, or literally just engage right there because like there was 4 comments.
Right.
And that was the only one.
And when comments were coming from folks who were either connected to your church or usually at the very most 1 degree separated from your church, you could assume that they were coming in a spirit of dialogue and potential like actual connection. Whereas in the current era of social, which we're about to talk about and speak to, that's just not true anymore. You can't make the same assumptions about folks commenting on your social content that they're coming in good faith, because your posts now in this new era have a dramatically increased opportunity to reach millions of folks.
And even if in the previous era, a person was being profane, if they were commenting and they didn't really care to hear what the church had to say, because of the degrees of separation that existed, if you deleted that comment, it's potentially getting back to you via the person that like knows about it, because like there were 4 comments and you clearly deleted 1.
Yes.
And the person that saw it was a non-Christian friend of a person that goes to your church, and then they said something, and then that person who goes to your church felt like the church maybe could have done more. And so you kind of always had to take the high road.
Yeah.
Always had to take the high road on the off chance, but like not uncommon chance that person would connect to your church in some way. So we fast forward to the discovery era. TikTok comes around, introduces the brand new way of doing social. This is 2018 and after. And now the upside of this era of social, and why I would never trade it for anything else, is that half or more of what we see on our social feeds comes from accounts that we do not choose to follow. So your church can be introducing itself to people that are in your community and beyond at any point. And when it happens, it often happens at scale.
Yeah.
And this is an important element of this entire conversation to discuss. Because what will happen, let's start with this. The wisdom of Scripture is for all people, for all time. We know this. What's also true is that the wisdom of Scripture commonly goes against the wisdom of the world. And so you can take the most, for a Christian, let's say, vanilla, pretty straightforward, not provocative whatsoever, belief, perspective of worldview, present that to people outside the Christian faith, and it can be tremendously abrasive.
Sure.
It can come off offensive. It can come off nonsensical, just like this makes no sense.
Yeah.
The wisdom of man is not the wisdom of God. And so what that means is, if you have a sermon clip content, which is where this happens the most, I would say, and it does go viral, it's probably going viral because there's something in there that is making people feel strongly. Strongly of, yes, this is the way to live. Strongly, you are weird Christians.
Yeah.
And so what that means is the videos that go most viral are the ones that are going to attract the most comments, of course, but the reason they went viral is probably because they were the types of content that was going to draw comments to begin with.
Yes.
Because they're making people feel something.
Yes.
So you kind of have this self-fulfilling thing. That being said, I'll make the caveat. I have seen some incredibly vanilla social pieces that have gone viral The one that comes to mind is a pastor this year, one of the best sermon illustrations I saw. And this pastor was like, hey, did you know that there are 365 days in a year? And everyone was like, yes. And then he asked Siri, hey, Siri, how many times does the Bible speak to worry? And Siri was like, there are 365 references. And he's like, see, every day you got worry, and every day God has something to say to you. And then people were like, well, actually, and I mean, maybe they were true, maybe they're right. It was more to the spirit of like, but people were still getting upset about it. So this era of discovery means that you're going to be introducing yourself to people. And so what that means is more and more comments are coming in. Churches are having to deal with this more and more because the criticism and sometimes like outright hate and profanity that they're receiving is so different from 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to install these new rules and these new best practices.
I was reading in the New Yorker this article about, the website Popular Science.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so there's this article in the New Yorker.
You know Popular Science for kids.
Yes. And so they're talking about how in September of last year, Popular Science actually turned off all comments on their website because of the influx of anonymous comments that were coming in.
Right.
And they were saying like, okay, the hate that is coming in from these anonymous comments is too like detracting from the point of the science we're trying to publish. And folks are getting bogged down in the comment section because of these anonymous comments. So like, we're just going to turn this off. Popular Science said even a fractious minority wields enough power to skew a reader's perception of a story. And so they're like, okay, we're publishing this science and how this intersects with what we're talking about is like, okay, we're publishing these sermon clips on Instagram, right? And in a discovery era, it's not unlikely for one of your sermon clips to go viral if you've crafted it with a good hook, regardless of your church size or your follower size. If you got a good hook and you're providing some provocative truths of the Christian tradition and wisdom, like it's probably pretty likely that eventually one of your clips is going to go viral. So now all of a sudden this piece of content is catapulted outside of your local sphere and into like the internet. And although on Instagram and Facebook, where a lot of these videos are going viral, there isn't a whole lot of anonymity like there is maybe on Twitter when folks take to Twitter in an anonymous way, or in the Popular Science comment section way where there's true anonymity. When you get outside of like that 1 degree of separation or direct interaction with a local church, folks are like very eager to say things from across the globe via the internet that they wouldn't have the courage to say in person. And so that's what happens in these comment sections is like folks are saying things on these sermon clips or can say things, are prone to say things on these sermon clips that you would never say to a local church and you would never say to somebody in person. And that's just how the anonymity or the physical separation of these comment sections in the discovery era can work. And so some churches take the stance of like, oh, well, we'll just turn off comments. Like they'll take the Popular Science route, which, oh, we'll just turn off comments altogether, which we're not convinced is the best way. There actually is like a fruitful way, in addition to what we've already alluded to here, to interact and engage with comments both locally and these kind of like these comments that are coming in from abroad. And we've got some like specific tips and tactics, methodology for interacting with those kinds of things in the comments and what the New Yorker piece was trying to paint was like, okay, Popular Science has made this choice, but it's probably not the best way to engage in a discovery era. There's got to be a better way.
And for them, it's probably coming at a cost because platforms are not going to have as much incentive to share your content when they know that there's going to be no engagement whatsoever. Like you're not using social for social now. You're using it for like broadcast, which is not what these platforms are designed to do. And they're not incentivized to prioritize content that does not want to play by the rules. That being said, if you're Popular Science, your publication is big enough that you can still receive distribution.
Right.
And what you've also probably made the estimation about is that there are certain vocal groups right now in this era of time that believe that modern science is not honest. And so they have great incentive to basically picket outside of every single post. And they're so loud that not only can the people that want to engage with the content, they aren't able to, but also it skews the perspective.
Exactly.
And this is the important thing. You have to remember, the piece of content that you made, that you've watched through prior to publishing, that is not the experience of a user when they engage with that content. What they're going to do is they're going to see this content come across their screen. They're going to see the hook that engages them. They're going to watch 3 seconds, and then they're going to go straight to the comments. And so what that means is, depending on what they see in the comments, that is going to dictate how they probably engage with the post. Practical example of this. Last week, Alex and I were in Utah. And the conversation that motivated us doing this episode was a conversation we had with this church. We were doing an individual review of their social account because we were at this church and like, hey, can you look at some of our stuff? We were in person. I was like, great, let's do it. So they throw up their Instagram on the TV screen, and it's just me and Alex and the woman that's in charge of creative and social at this church. She says, like, this was a post that did really well for us. And I had never seen this post before. And this post was about wives submitting to their husbands and husbands loving their wives like Jesus loved the church. And so I didn't know this church. And so I'm kind of curious, like, oh, I wonder what their theology is on this and how they're going to present that theology, at least. And so it's this like very visible sermon illustration where the husband asks the wife to bow to him. And as soon as she does, he bows to her. And it's this idea of like, as long as you're like submitting to each other, that's what it is. It's mutual submission. Yes. And there was this like physical observation of it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Before I'd actually seen that, I had already read the first comment that Instagram had already pinned that had said, I've never seen this theological concept portrayed in such a useful way. As soon as I saw it, I was like, I don't know who this church is. I'm interested how they're going to do this. Yeah. And then I looked at the comment and it was like reassuring.
Yeah, it's like, oh, now I can't wait to watch the end of the video. You're coming into it with confidence instead of suspicion. And that's just based off an interaction that you previewed in the comments, which, like you said, you and I are not the only ones who, when we're watching a reel that comes across our discovery feed, it's coming from a place that we don't follow. When we get hooked in, when we know we've taken the bait, we're all like opening the comment section. Like it's I don't know how we got to this place where it's like an innate reflex, but it really is. And so there's a lot of information to be had in what's going on in that comment section that in like a circular way informs how we're going to end up engaging with the rest of the content.
Let's interrogate that idea. How did we get to this place? We got to this place because separate the comments, we kind of just have to trust that this creator is being completely honest and presenting their perspective in a way that is completely like free of bias, which of course is not true. What makes the comments so useful is they're almost like the group of people that are like, hey, we've already evaluated this content and here's what we think of it. And that allows us to basically filter through, okay, it seems like people are, and that can be healthy and unhealthy in ways. In a lot of ways, it's pretty much like a meritocracy where it's like the creator's like, this is my idea. And the comments were like, well, here's what we think of your idea. Yeah. And sometimes the people on that site matter because if that site skews this age or it skews this political worldview, then that is going to inform what you see. So there are a lot of interesting dynamics going on, but let's talk about your options here. You can, of course, delete a comment. Depending on the platform, you could hide a comment. You could block the individual. You could pin a comment. You can ignore a comment. You can respond to a comment. You can send a DM reply directly to that person from the comment. So there are a lot of different options here. When someone is profane, I just want to give you permission, make this crystal clear. Profanity, which is described in the dictionary as blasphemous or obscene language. So we're not talking profanity in terms of 4-letter words. We're talking profanity in terms of like, this person is saying awful things. Yeah. Just delete it. That person is not there to operate in good faith. They are not in your circle of influence. They are not 1 degree separated from you, almost certainly. And so it's just not worth them taking up real estate on your post in that way. Right. Especially because churches get comments way worse than we do. Sure. Because of the nature of what they're talking about. And so you might have a pretty vanilla, life-giving message, and someone who wants to really suppress that life-giving message from Jesus could come in and say something pretty nasty and get a lot of support. On my post, if someone says something nasty, it doesn't get a lot of support. Right. So I don't have to worry about deleting it. Sometimes if someone makes fun of my eyebrows, it's getting deleted. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? They're right. You can stay today. So just, it's okay to delete. Yeah. Churches struggle with this because in the previous era, I would have never recommended deleting content. I would have said, sure, if it's profane, you can delete it. But so rarely was it profane that we're in the habit now of like, I have to respond to everything. They're being so mean. And this has 10,000 comments. In the previous era, there were 7. And Brady said, don't delete. And I can deal with 7. But there's 700 I have to deal with. So it's okay to delete. Secondly, blocking a person. I very rarely block people. Usually because if someone's getting in my comments and being mean about it, they're probably like a one-time thing. Right. So they discovered your content and they didn't like what they had to say, or what you had to say. They let you know about it, and they never saw your content ever again because the algorithm was like, okay, well, they probably didn't like that anyway. So if you have someone that's like pestering you, block them. Certainly okay. Ignore. I do this a lot. Sometimes people have different beliefs and opinions than I. They want to talk in good faith or whatever, or they say something like the eyebrow thing, and I'm like, oh, okay, whatever, like. That's fine. Like, let them say their piece.
Do you think that depends on the volume of comments? Like you have 125,000 followers on Instagram, 150,000 subs on YouTube. So like a lot of eyes on your content, and frankly, just a lot of comments, like hundreds of comments. So if you choose to ignore a comment, it's amongst a group of a bunch of other comments that are ignored. But let's say you're a local church and you're getting 5 comments or 10 comments, and you choose to reply to the positive ones, and the 1 or 2 negative ones you choose to ignore. Do you think that those stick out in a more meaningful way because of like the smaller sample size for a more, smaller local church?
Yeah, and this gets to how challenging moderation and dealing with comments can become in the era right now. Because yes, I get a lot of comments, but for churches that have posts that get indexed in search, what happens is they end up getting lots of comments, but they don't have any practice in getting lots of comments. And so suddenly they're being bombarded and they're not used to it in any way. And so
they feel like they have to respond to all 400 comments on a post that goes viral.
Or they've never had that type of heat before. So like I had a pastor reach out and like, someone was making fun of my voice. Like, what do I do? I've never had that happen before. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And we kind of talked our way through it based on like what they felt and like, hey, was this adding to the conversation at all? Probably not. Like it was just being rude and hurtful. Okay, great. Then just remove it. Like there's nothing to be gained from that. So part of making this all work is evaluating, like, has the comment section taken over from the content?
Right.
And that's what you're trying to really get a gauge of. Like, is the content still supreme and the comment section is like there to support it and supplement it? Or has the comment section kind of become this runaway force and this runaway train? And now it's actually hindering and hurting the content. And so let's get to that point. The first thing that I recommend churches do is pin comments. The pin comment feature was created to give creators more control over their comments so that they had a little bit more autonomy and that it wasn't this like, mob mentality that was going up against the creator and they couldn't do anything. So here's a technique that I like to do, and I encourage churches to do this. I said this to the person, the church that we were at, because I said, it's really nice that the top comment was supportive of you. When that happens naturally, that's great. And I always think like, especially when you're talking about any type of content that's like polarized, if there is someone that has said something positive and it's getting a lot of support, like I'll pin it. Great, pin that. The second,
it just gives you a little bit of power to control when folks inevitably open that comment section to see what's going on down there. It gives you a little bit of power to show them what you want them to see first.
And people are lazy. The reason we open comments is basically to be like, okay, should I keep watching this or no?
Yes.
If you open it, first, they seem pretty supportive. Okay, back to the video. Like it can be as simple as that. If people kept scrolling, they could see more negative stuff. Like, whatever. What you can also do is pin comments that are made in good faith that are disagreeing with your position. And this is especially true if the content you're publishing, is polarized. Because that means that many people are by default going to come to this from the other side of the table.
And this post that you mentioned could actually, if it played out differently, could be a perfect example of that. It's a very polar, like that verse of scripture in Ephesians from the Apostle Paul, very polarizing about submission and what you believe about this and how this plays out. So that there could very well in that comment section be one of these comments that is a good faith pushback on like, okay, but like what about where the Apostle Paul said this or whatever. So that post is actually a great candidate for a comment section that could kind of inspire this like very affirmative, like, oh yeah, I haven't seen this illustration more useful than this. While on the other side, maybe some pushback. That's a great candidate to pin that comment because that, I don't know, maybe it's a 50-50 split. Folks coming to that piece of content believing one thing about submission and another thing about submission. So that half the people watching that piece of content are wondering what you have to say about their side. And if they watch the content and realize that you're not on their side, that you're on the other side, well, what do you have to say about my position? And so preemptively pinning that comment and your response to it addresses them in that way, right?
This church had another reel, and this pastor was saying how, what didn't happen in the early church? We didn't have church hoppers. We didn't have people leaving the church. And he showed like this map of like the Middle East. He's like, look, because this was the other church.
Yeah, he couldn't just
Too far.
go there.
And he's like, we have become too quick to leave churches. He's like, the best way to have a perfect church is to, not go to one. And I think the first comment in this case for this church, when we were reviewing this reel, was not a supportive one. It was a person saying like, well, what about all like the times where church is toxic and like it's just not healthy and it's like, coercive. Like, what about those? And I said, this sermon clip, like many, is not an exhaustive take on this subject.
Right.
And it never will be. And so I love the pinned comment approach where I would pin that question because it's that comment is made in good faith. And then I would reply and I would say, hey, we totally hear what you're saying. There are, of course, cases where the church is not healthy and it's being coercive, and we wouldn't want to be supportive of those. What we also think is right now, people are probably tending to move too quickly. And so the point the pastor was making, and you go on, it's done in a graceful way. It's done in a way where you acknowledge, oh, that's interesting. This isn't an exhaustive piece of content. It's a 30-second thing. We encourage you to watch the full message. If you don't, here's our take on this. Now, when I open that up, I see that, and I go, oh, so this sermon clip didn't cover that. They didn't cover it because they were ignoring it. Oh, sorry, they didn't not cover it because they were ignoring it. Yeah. They didn't mention that there are some cases where it's actually not healthy to stay in a church because they don't believe in those. They just didn't get to it. Oh, this is a reasonable church and a reasonable take. Cool. And because that was the first comment, it basically puts me at ease.
Yes.
And it takes down my filters, or it takes down like my fight or flight, like, oh, this church, they're just trying to tell me, of course a church doesn't want me to leave a church because they're the church, sickos. Like, it actually takes me off that ledge by having that comment. And so that pinned comment, it's kind of, it's paradoxical. Why would I pin a negative comment? Well, because it's not even for that person. It's for the hundreds, or when it's a viral post, thousands, tens of thousands of people that went right to the comment section to see what kind of church is this and what do they believe. And so this is a great approach for you to take back control in the comments. And by actually highlighting someone that's negative, it disarms them. People are coming in and they got their knives out and they're like, we want blood. And then you actually highlight their perspective. You disarm them. I go, oh, why is my perspective here?
Right. You expect your perspective to be suppressed in an environment like that. This New Yorker article talks about how in some comment sections, whether there's an opportunity to be truly anonymous or not, the lack of in some types of comment sections, according to the features that are built into the comment sections, the lack of social proof or like social interaction kind of breeds this negativity. But they were talking about comment sections like in Reddit threads and stuff where you can actually not just upvote but downvote things. You can do this on YouTube actually. You can't do this on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. You can do this kind of on Facebook where you could react. There's no downvote, but you can react negatively to a post. The negative reactions actually bolsters the social consciousness in the comment section. So that like on YouTube, if you're watching a video that's like a broadly accepted YouTube video, but somebody comes in with like a bad faith argument and you see it has like 300 dislikes, it's like, okay, I see this opinion, it's still here, but I know that like this is not the consensus opinion of the group. And so they're just talking about how that can be helpful. Now, you don't have those tools in Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. The comment section can't work that out for themselves.
Right. You can like it, but you can't dislike it.
Yeah. And so you can see comments that are broadly liked, but you can't see the inverse. And so for the ones that are made in good faith, this pinned comment approach is really, really clever. And the church we were working with, they responded when you suggested this technique. They were like, oh, okay, first of all, I didn't know you could pin comments. So surely there's folks listening to the show today that are learning that you can pin comments. And then secondly, she was like, I never would have thought to pin the negative one. Like it's a really smart approach to this.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would I want to suppress the negativity?
Yes.
I don't want to give it more visibility. There's one more situation worth discussing, and that is sometimes a post can be so viral or it can just strike a nerve in such a way that any approach you take is not going to be successful. So we had this happen earlier this year when we published the carousel post about elevation and how, hey, they're not going to be saying the word resurrection in their Easter promotions because it's a word that can be strange for people that have no history with faith, especially as America becomes more and more unchristian. So they're going to reserve that for in-service. And then in-service, they're going to say, hey, here's why we use the word resurrection as Christians and here's what it means. And people did not care for that message, or there was a strong contingent Most of the people in our audience were like, oh, makes sense. And then it kind of reached an audience that wasn't our audience. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to follow the pinned comment strategy. So I pinned a few of the like the people that were like, hey, I don't know if I agree with this. And I explained further because they had brought up things that, despite it being a 10-post carousel, didn't cover in exhaustion to exhaustion. So, oh, okay, great. Here's and despite that, it got to the point where the negativity was outweighing the positivity, and it clearly wasn't like based in logic. It was based in like, it doesn't matter what you say, this is wrong. And I'm guessing that was kind of similar with popular science. It's like, okay, like you're not really here to like engage the material. You're just here to like do the picketing, which is fine. If you're going to picket, I'm just going to turn off the comments.
Yeah.
So what I did was for that post, once it kind of got like beyond me, and this was the first time it's ever happened, I turned off the comments. I didn't delete the post, turned off the comments. Because guess what? Then people come to it and they're like, oh, this isn't interesting. And they keep scrolling.
Yeah.
And guess what? 4 weeks later, turn the comments back on. And now, if you get to that post, you can engage it in good faith. You can see my pinned comments. You can see what I said, and you can decide yes or no. But you're not just going to look and see like a bunch of angry people. Right. And what we don't want to create is this opportunity for people to be outraged online. It's the worst part of being online. It's what keeps us on the most. It's what is the most unhealthy for us physically, spiritually, mentally, psychologically, and I would never want our churches to contribute to that. And so like if you get to a post like, hey, I've done everything I can and you know, this has just gone to a place where I have no control over it, then your final end of the line act to take is to turn off the comments.
There's a phrase for this. It comes from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They did a study on anonymity and posting and commenting, and they call it the nasty effect, which is like when comment threads get out of control, it just like breeds nastiness.
It's like a mob in real life. Like you can't stop it.
And so like you didn't instigate that on purpose. When you have a post go viral, a post in good faith, you know, our post about elevation or any church's post about a sermon clip talking about the good news of Jesus Christ. You're not instigating this rage or this nastiness effect on purpose, but invariably sometimes it may happen. And when it does, I think what we're trying to say is maybe we do have a responsibility to shut down the mob in ways that we are able, because it did, like, it got to the point with that elevation post. We can speak to that because we were firsthand there. Like people were sharing it because they disagreed with it, you know, and then so you get like this real like feedback loop of negativity that's spreading online, which is just like not good for anyone. Like you can handle it, we can handle it, but like it just wasn't good for anyone. So sometimes you got to come off the top rope and like either like archive the post for a little bit or turn off the comments just to you know, weather the storm. But the content, like we still believe in it and it still exists, and so it's still there now. But yeah, that nasty effect like is a real thing. We've all experienced that online, and we experience it sometimes, albeit less in person, because our interpersonal like the humanity of in-person communication actually it keeps us from doing a lot of the things we do online. But yeah, that nasty effect, it really is, it's compounding negative interest for sure.
One more approach that you can take, now that it comes to my mind, is one that I started employing the DM automation on Instagram specifically. And the reason we're talking about Instagram here, though DM automation works on Facebook as well, is because Instagram is like the spot where most churches are seeing broad distribution right now. It's the place where it's most easy to attain that. And so it's most applicable to most churches. I started doing this DM automation where at the end of the post, it's like, hey, if you want to also not say resurrection during Easter, don't comment Jesus, because we would never say that either. So I did a post today where we talked about stage design. We made these things called shadow boxes. So at the end of the post, whether it was a reel or a carousel, say, comment the word box and we'll send you the full video tutorial that we did on this. So I did this on a recent carousel about iPhone video settings cheat sheet for churches. And one comment came in because they didn't like that we were talking about black magic cameras, because the cameras are black and they're really cheap. So it's like they're magic, really affordable. And this person said, really smart move for you to flood the comments with this DM automation so that no one can see about your witchcraft.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. They thought that I was like flooding
bot
the comments.
Farming, yeah.
I don't even know if they thought bot farming, or they're just like, hey, these comments, there's so many comments that all say like iPhone.
Yeah.
There's no way we could even like figure out what you're trying to say. And I was like, huh, it's not bad.
Yeah.
And this is actually interesting. I think this could have positive or negative, at least in our context, and for the church context, it might be more positive overall. So you'd have to do this on every single post, right? So like every single sermon clip, this person was talking about,
Comment submit.
yeah,
We'll
maybe.
send you the full sermon clip.
Yikes. I mean, maybe that's the word, right? And then there's 150 comments that say the word submit.
Yeah.
And then it's a lot harder to find the negative ones. And eventually, like we said, we're not exhaustively interrogating things. We're mostly just first few comments, people like it, they don't swipe. So someone could open it up, submit. Okay, it's not worth my time.
Yeah.
I'm going to engage this content for what it is. And that is an interesting way of you just kind of flood it with nothingness. And then it's hard for the negativity to rise to the top because there's just so many comments that say, submit. Maybe I should submit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comments.
It's like people come to the comment section wanting to have their voice heard, but if there's already 300 people yelling there, it's like you could yell as loud as you want.
Box. Final thing worth mentioning is Google reviews. Maybe you came to this episode and you were, okay, well, what about
Google reviews are tough because you cannot delete those.
So with Google reviews, and for the reason that Pastor Passport said, you want to respond to every single negative one that comes in, because if you leave one there, it's just this hanging negativity, and it's basically accusations have been made against you, and you're I am not here to deny those allegations.
Yes,
It's you want to respond. This happens with restaurants, right? You see a 3 or a 2-star review, and you're wait a minute, there's a lot of 5 stars, but what about this 2-star?
Yeah.
What are they saying?
Yeah.
And then the restaurant's hey, sir, we appreciate you. We remember you. You were very belligerent and you punched our server, and that's why we asked you to leave. You're okay, great. So this restaurant is cool and this person is crazy. Just wanted to confirm that. If you leave that out there, it's kind of this accusation that you're not responding to. It's nothing to say to that accusation.
Yeah.
Maybe that lends more credibility to it. So with Google, you always want to respond. That's not true on social, right? You don't always have to respond on social, but on Google reviews, you do. So keep that in mind. Broadly speaking, if it's profane, go ahead and delete it.
Yes.
Spam your replies with DM automation.
There you go.
So that way, but more seriously, use that pin and respond feature. That's the most powerful thing that your church can do to control the narrative in that comment conversation, in that comment thread. It's an amazing tool. Make sure to take advantage of it. And thank you for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
We're not that far from 40.
We're pretty far.
Yeah, but not that far.
We're as far away from 40 as we were from 24.
Yeah, but that doesn't feel like that long ago.
24, I didn't even have a kid.
Yeah, but that still doesn't feel that long ago. We got married at 23. That does not feel like that long ago.
So I think that you think you're younger than you are, but you're not.
Okay.
Your perspective is warped in both ways. I'm almost 40. Jeez, I was also almost 24. No, neither are true.
Right.
You are 31.
That's right.
Now, if you want to talk about me being almost 40,
Pretty close.
Once you're 34, you are 40.
Yeah.
33 is you're 30. 34,
Yeah,
you're 40.
mid-30s is 40.
34 is you are 40 years old.
I remember when my dad turned 40.
I remember when my dad turned 40. It was a big party.
Yeah. Yeah. Yikes.
Sheesh.
Better start planning now.